Welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this summit so far. That was a great session that we just heard from Jel on cross-border vehicle fraud in Europe. It was great to get a good understanding on what's going on over in that part of the world. This next session I'm really excited about because I get to introduce one of my favorite people in the world and one of the best thought leaders and someone that's been driving the counter fraud industry for many, many years. If you haven't met him, I think you'll be really impressed with what he has to talk about with the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. Um, I'll just turn it over to you, Matthew, because there's not much else I can say that can introduce such a really renowned speaker. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dennis, for such a very, very kind introduction. And before I say anything else, please allow me to again welcome all of you from around the world's leading anti-fraud experts in joining us for the 2021 Global Insurance Fraud Summit. It is truly an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to be with you, even if it's virtual this year again, but to also have the opportunity to partner with you throughout the year and to learn what you're doing in your respective nations. The Coalition Against Insurance Fraud is very honored to be a part of the Global Summit and to have this opportunity to talk with you today. But before I go any further, I would also be remiss if I did not return the very kind comments to Dennis Toomey and his entire team at Protaviti, and what wonderful leaders they have been from the start of planning for this year's summit, putting the programming together and allowing us to all gather from the corners of the world over these 2 days to share the latest and greatest information on how we can help and partner together to fight insurance fraud. It's also my privilege on behalf of the coalition to join with the others on the steering committee. You see their names on the slide here, but what incredible world leaders this steering committee has for its benefit and for the benefit of all attendees in planning not only for this year's Global Insurance Fraud Summit, but really growing this program for many, many years to come. So it's our privilege and my honor to be able to share with you a little bit about what we at the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud have been up to, both since when we met virtually in 2020 for that year's summit, and also since we gathered together back in October of 2019 in Barcelona. And of course, like every one of your organizations around the world, the biggest thing that has changed and continues to change is the COVID-19 pandemic and how we are dealing with that. And one of the things I'm most proud to be able to share with you in this crazy world of a global pandemic is that the coalition is stronger than we've ever been. We are more financially strong, and we have more member organizations than we have had at any point in the coalition's nearing 30-year history. I don't know if that's in spite of or because of COVID, but it really does focus the parallel relationship between COVID-19 and the fight against insurance fraud, not only here in the United States, but literally around the world, and how it has reshaped everything that we have done over these past 18 months to even 2 years now since we gathered together. But for those of you who were with us in Barcelona in 2019, I'd just like you to think for a moment about not only the pandemic, but how our entire world has changed since we gathered together in person. And around the globe, there has been so much that we have dealt with, so many factors. Some of them directly influence the fight against insurance fraud. Some of them have no relationship. But you know what? They shape our world. And the one thing that we have talked about more and more is the fact that the fight against insurance fraud is a global fight. It's no longer something we can do in our own nations. So as we look at how not only COVID-19, but other factors are changing the world, I think one of the challenges that we all have, and I know it's one of the things that we talk about with our leaders here at the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, is always being mindful about how world events are changing and how those world events, either in the short term, or perhaps more importantly in the long term, are going to impact how we fight insurance fraud together. Because the reality is we know COVID-19 changed our world, but it is also changing the way that we fight insurance fraud. And I think the sad reality is that we've come to realize that, but what we need to seize upon is the positive aspect that COVID allows us to enjoy as fraud fighters. Now, that may seem a little bit odd initially, especially when we look at the number of deaths around the world. But the reason I mention that is because of changing leadership and the way the world is changing. And I want to talk with you about that in a couple of different respects. But I think if there's any positive that comes out of the world of COVID-19, it's the fact that I know from the coalition's perspective, it has strengthened so much our global partnerships and our global ties with many of you around the world. Absent a pandemic, I don't know that we would have had the opportunity to do that. Absent the opportunity to not get on planes and travel to foreign countries, but to simply log into a Zoom meeting or a Microsoft Teams session and be able to share information, to share knowledge back and forth in the height of a pandemic has been a tremendous way for us to grow individually and as worldwide organizations in sharing of information to protect our citizens against insurance fraud. So what else has changed since we gathered together? Well, for the first time here in the United States, in the history of the three major organizations that deal with insurance fraud, the Coalition, our partners and co-presenters for this global summit, IAZU, and the NICB, all three organizations in 2020 underwent, for the first time ever, simultaneous changes of leadership. And the reason I know that, NICB has undergone a series of changes of leadership over decades. IAZU, since it elects its officers, undergoes change of leadership on a periodic basis as their members elect new leaders. The Coalition, when I took over this role as executive director in 2020, I filled the shoes of a man who many of you know, who was with us in Barcelona, named Dennis J. Dennis had held this position for 27 years. So that's the reason why, for the first time since we really gathered together, at least in person, all three of the leading organizations in the United States that deal with insurance fraud have undergone a change of leadership. And it's certainly my privilege as the head of the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud to have our strongest ties ever with my friend Celeste Dotson and her leadership at IAZU. And we are always looking for ways to strengthen and grow our partnerships with our friends at the National Insurance Crime Bureau. And you'll hear me talk about several projects today where we're doing exactly that. So what do you need to know on the world level? We have three major organizations that operate here in the United States, but we're working together. We're working as partners, and we want to reach out collectively and with our individual organizations to build stronger relationships with each of you around the world as well. So in that vein, I'd like you to meet our Coalition team, because I have the privilege of talking to you today, but this is the group that really pulls together what we do at the Coalition. We have our Deputy Executive Director, A.D. Duval. A.D. joined us a little more than a year ago and has been a tremendous asset to the Coalition, running our business operations and assisting me just in all aspects of putting on our meetings, programming, and coordinating our staff efforts. We also have a new Director of Communications, Arenze Ifakauche, joined us, and Arenze oversees the myriad of our publications, podcast, and other programs that you'll hear me talk about today. Our rock solid person that's been there throughout it all is Kendra Smith, and Kendra is our operations manager. So if you have any questions about membership, our website, anything such as that, Kendra is really the glue that holds it all together. And then we have two outstanding additions to our staff as well that run our Operation Outreach, where we stay in touch with our members, and also run our task forces that you'll hear me talk about. And those two incredible individuals are Carmen Russo. Carmen previously headed SIU investigations for the John Hancock Life Insurance Company here in the United States, and Dominic Dugo. Dominic was an insurance fraud prosecutor with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office in San Diego, California. And we are really privileged to have both of these anti-fraud leaders who retired from their primary careers now work with us as part of the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud team. Well, I'd like to share with you a little bit. I talked about COVID-19. But when we really talk in a coalition update or what we've even heard over the last 2 days of the Global Summit, I'd like to take you back in time to January of 2020. For those of you in Barcelona, it had only been a few months since we had met. Several of us were preparing for the phenomenal symposium on insurance fraud that Alpha, Maxen's organization in France, and IBM Luxoft put on in Paris in February of 20. But at that point, I just want you to imagine for a moment that I had told you in January of 2020 that within 90 days, all of your offices would be shut down, governmental, private sector, that the parking lots of major office towers or city parking garages would be vacant. And that fraud fighters, whether you're a regulator, whether you're working with an insurance carrier or an organization like the Coalition or others, that we would all be working remotely from dining room tables, basements, spare bedrooms. You would have really thought I was crazy. But you know, the most defining thing when I talked about the growth of the coalition and what we've been able to accomplish, not only our organization, but fraud organizations, insurance carriers, regulators all across the world stepped up and did a remarkable thing during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then almost overnight, our entire profession pivoted from the traditional ways that we had fought fraud to learning new ways to do it remotely. Some of you know, for 35 years, I had the privilege of being an insurance attorney, a litigator or barrister here in the United States. That profession as well, our partners, we have law firm members of the coalition, had to learn how to take testimony under oath, whether it's depositions or examinations under oath, to have hearings in front of courts, to do appellate arguments, all working remotely. But the point of this is we did it and we did it well. And that's been a defining moment, not only for the coalition, but for the partners that we have the privilege to work with. And let me give you a great example of that I think ties into our Global Summit discussion here over these days. In the middle of March of 2020, I reached out to my then partners at the NICB and IAZU. It was March 14th, I remember it well. And I called both of them. And I said, we have no idea what COVID-19 and this pandemic are going to mean for our respective organizations or for the fight against insurance fraud. But what we do need to do is we need to get out in front and provide information, resources, and knowledge that the fraud fight has to continue throughout the pandemic. Now, the coalition may have taken the leadership role on that, but our strong partners came together with us miraculously, literally overnight. And the result was only 17 days later, we put on a webinar that was attended by people around the world. How do I know that? We had 3,000 attendees on one webinar to talk about the fight against insurance fraud in the very early days and weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the largest gathering of anti-fraud professionals that's ever occurred in the history of the world. I'm very proud we had a big part in leading that, along with NICB and IAZU. But absent this COVID-19 pandemic, we would have never gathered together 3,000 anti-fraud fighters for the largest event of our profession ever in world history. But what's even more important, it demonstrates the commitment in the United States and around the world that we have come together to fight fraud, to work cooperatively. And although we haven't had 3,000 people attend one event since, virtually or in person, it does demonstrate the commitment of our profession and the willingness to work together to fight fraud, whether it's in a pandemic or, I believe, in the years to come, this will be one of the best residuals that we will see. You know, one of the things that we know is that insurance fraud is going global. That's the entire reason that in 2019, this summit was begun to share information, to bring together the leaders of the world in fighting against insurance fraud. And as a result of the original Global Summit in 2019, I can tell you it has changed the direction that we have here at the coalition dramatically. We too are looking at ways that we can go global in the fight against insurance fraud. I mentioned early on being a part of the steering committee to lead this wonderful seminar programming that we are doing with the Global Summit. We also are partnering this year, you heard yesterday, the results of the Globalization of Insurance Fraud study, the largest study of its type ever done in conjunction with IBM, Luxoft, and the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. That's a study we probably would never have envisioned, but for the Global Summit. And we're privileged to partner with the Global Intelligence Network to share information on all of the emerging technologies that deal with financial insurance crimes, all tied to this global network that is out there now that fraudsters and scammers are using to profit on the backs of businesses and, more importantly, consumers. So what are some of the other things that we're addressing here in the United States with the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud? And one of them that we're very excited about also involves you. I mentioned that we were formed 27, now 28 years ago in 1993. Well, over time, like other things, our bylaws, our documents that we operate under, had become stale. And we had a blue ribbon committee of our members this year work with our leadership to update our bylaws. Now, I won't get down too detailed in all of those changes that we are making, but one of the ones that we are most excited about is to provide a new opportunity for global organizations to participate and share organizational information with the coalition. Now, we have to vote on this in December. Our organization is comprised of almost 250 member organizations, and our board has more than 50 people that sit on the board and have to vote for any type of changes. Those will be voted on at our December meeting here in Washington, D.C. But I am very confident that our new bylaws, we will be in touch with you in early 2022 to invite all of our global partners to join the coalition in a new category of membership that will allow you access to our website, our research, and the other information that you'll hear me talk about in just a moment. And it's one of the things that we are most excited about, to be able to welcome our global partners to be more involved in the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. Around the world, and especially here in the United States, we are also focusing on the question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And are we doing enough? And in the world of fighting insurance fraud, the leadership of the coalition came back resoundingly and said, no, we aren't. And the coalition is stepping up to call on all of our members to adopt the same type of model statement that we will present to our membership in December, but to not just adopt a statement, but to really make changes so that our profession is more diverse, offers more equity, not only for those in the profession, but for those whose lives we touch when decisions are made about insurance fraud coverage under an insurance contract, when criminal investigations are done, that they are done fairly and with the proper amount of equity and justice for anyone that's involved in that process. And we want to see a future of this profession that is more inclusive, where fraud fighters in the United States are more representative of the wonderful, diverse tapestry of the population of this nation. Something that we don't have now, but that we can certainly strive for in the years ahead, with the coalition leading the way with adopting this statement that we will present to our members in December on increased diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of the other ways that we have changed since we gathered the last time are also new and improved ways for us to communicate with our members. And even if you're not a member currently, we talked about the changes coming next year, but we still provide you access to this information on our website. So our Coalition Quarterly publication is now in its second year, providing quarterly updates on all of the various activities and functions of the coalition. In 2021, we launched our highly successful Fraud Pod. We've now had our second Fraud Pod issuance. It's a podcast that is both video and audio, interviews, updates, a wealth of information hosted by our communications director, Arinze Ithacauche. Our Fraud News Weekly continues to be our largest distribution and updating people every week on the latest in advocacy, outreach, arrest and conviction data, and news around the coalition, something we take a lot of pride in. We also have started since the pandemic issuing a series of infographics, something we had done on a very small scale before, but now these are going out on a regular basis, whether it's on cybercrime, healthcare sharing ministries here in the United States, workers' compensation fraud, COVID-19 scams, senior scams, all of these infographics we put out to our members, we put them out on our website, and most importantly, we're excited that many of the United States Departments of Insurance are using these on their websites, adding their state logos and pushing them out to the citizens all across the United States, something we very much enjoy doing. Prior to the pandemic, the coalition had never hosted a webinar. Our first one was that one I mentioned on March 31st, 2020. Since then, we have done a minimum of 4 every year. Just recently, we completed our Immunity, Are You Protected webinar that was done back in September. And we had 900 fraud fighters from across the United States registered to participate in that webinar program. So it's become a tremendous way for us to share information with our members and fraud fighters across the United States on cutting edge topics. I also invite you to visit our updated and still relatively new website. We rolled it out in late 2020, but we continue to make changes and enhancements and improvements throughout that website. So what are some of the features and something that you might want to consider doing in your own nations to help fraud fighters in your countries? Well, we provide interactive searches. So one of the big things the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud does is to be a repository for all of our 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, where we are headquartered, have differing insurance laws and regulations. We have a map where our members can go in, click on the title of what they want to look at, and then click on the state and get a report of all of the state laws or regulations impacting on insurance fraud. Hopefully in your countries, it may not be as complicated if you have one set of laws. Here, dealing with 51 is very difficult for many of our members. We also are a legislative advocacy organization. So you'll see on the screen that we have a pending legislation. That is where our members can monitor all of the various legislation, both here in Washington, D.C. at the federal level, but also at the state level, dealing with insurance fraud issues all across the United States. We also have interactive searches where our members can look at the latest arrest and convictions for insurance fraud crimes. And you'll see to the left, they can look at that by topic: staged automobile accidents, rate evasion, arson, and it will pull up for them the latest criminal convictions and arrest data, something we push out to our members every week on Tuesdays, where they can know exactly where insurance crimes are occurring across the United States. On our website, we also offer updates for consumers, especially on scam alerts, the latest ways that consumers are being scammed, and more importantly, how consumers can protect themselves from becoming the victim of a cyber crime or any other type of insurance scam or scheme that might be existing out there to defraud them. And then finally, we have a number of videos, resources, and tools, including new videos that we have pushed out this year that allow our members to share that information, again, on their websites, or to use them for television advertising, radio advertising, public service announcements, all designed to help in the fight against insurance fraud. Also, since I last had the opportunity to update you, we have 2 new exciting task forces that are operating within the coalition, because the coalition deals with all forms of insurance fraud across whether it's health insurance, what we call property and casualty, auto insurance, workers' compensation or employer liability, and any other form of insurance. So under the leadership, as I mentioned before, of Dominic Dugo, who heads our workers' compensation task force, and Carmen Russo, who heads our life and disability task force, we're doing a deeper study of insurance fraud for our members that are specifically involved in these type of insurance products. And we are thrilled that those task forces are now up and running in 2021, and their membership and their participation is growing literally every single month. Some other things that we're doing: we're updating the estimated cost of insurance fraud here in the United States. Well, I don't think in any nation it's ever possible to truly quantify the cost of insurance fraud and say to the penny or to the dollar or the euro, this is the cost of insurance fraud. But many years ago, the coalition in 1995 undertook to try to do that here in the United States. And the figure that was developed was $80 billion with a B, $80 billion back in 1995. So for the first time since then, the coalition, in partnership with our other organizations, including the NICB, IAZU, and several others, are looking to update that number. Well, if we alone applied an inflation factor, that $80 billion in 1995 in US dollars would be 143 billion US dollars today. For those of you who are more acquainted with the euro, that would be insurance fraud cost of 122 billion euro every single year. So we look to announce the results of this in our country in 2022. This is a list of the organizations that are working with us. One of our members that makes the coalition unique is we have academic members, and Colorado State University Global and their department under the head of Dr. Michael Skiba has 2 doctoral students that are working with the coalition and our partners to update this anti-fraud statistic. And we feel it's absolutely crucial to push out a more accurate estimate of the cost of insurance fraud in America. So look for that to come out next year. One of the other aspects of the coalition are our research studies. You heard the result yesterday of the study that we just released on the globalization of insurance fraud. Well, earlier this year, we also released a 2-year study that we did here in the United States on the impact of COVID-19 on insurance fraud across the country. And this was data that we pulled from insurance departments and their fraud referrals all across the United States. We also last fall pushed out the largest study that had been done on the use of artificial intelligence, specifically in the world of insurance fraud detection and how it is being used, and the concerns that our members also had about the ethical and proper use of artificial intelligence going forward. And we also continue to do our benchmarking studies and our technology studies. In December, we'll announce an updated report of the state of insurance fraud technology. That is a study that we are running across the United States currently. And stay tuned, especially for our world partners that will be able to be more a part of the coalition in 2022. In January, we'll announce our research studies for next year. And it's quite an exciting lineup, both domestically in the United States and also on international issues, including what motivates people to commit insurance fraud. So more details to come, but we will certainly be coming back with more information on that in the new year ahead. The other area in which the coalition operates domestically is our United States Advocacy Program. And this is one of the strongest aspects of the coalition. We have our Amicus Curiae, or Friend of the Court program, in addition to our legislative efforts. Legislatively, we're pushing bills all across the United States, whether it's at the federal level up on Capitol Hill here in Washington, or in the state capitals across the country. And we're very proud we've had 38 new laws already put on the books in 2021 alone. Our Amicus Curiae program, though, is unique in the United States. Amicus Curiae simply means friend of the court. And here in the United States, we are able, in both our federal or national court system and in the state court systems, to be able to petition the court for an organization like the coalition to file a brief on an important legal matter, to educate the court on why fraud is an important issue and why the justices on that court should decide a decision in a certain manner that helps us in the fight against insurance fraud. Well, you'll see here that we have a list of 6 states. These are the states where we either currently have or recently completed Amicus Curiae filings on behalf of our members. A free service we provide to our members, by the way, where leading law firms across the United States partner with the coalition to file these very important briefs. And as I mentioned, we also have our legislative action. Right now, our Government Affairs Committee and the leadership of the coalition is working very closely to identify for 2022 the legislative priorities that we will have all across the United States. The legislation is one of the primary ways that we can move the needle and help change the laws that are in place in our nation to make insurance fraud more of a crime and to provide more tools and resources for state, federal, and even private investigation of insurance fraud. So it's something that the coalition is highly committed to. One of those issues that we're dealing with here in the United States is a dramatic rise in fraud related to towing activities, especially involving large commercial trucks and vehicles, and staged automobile accidents. Now, around the world, you're familiar with staged automobile accidents. They occur literally across the globe. Towing might be more of a United States issue, but both issues are highly important and on our agenda for the year ahead. They are so important that the coalition has formed a three-way partnership. Our partners in addressing both towing fraud and staged accidents are the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, the largest association of property and casualty insurers in the United States, and the leading organization, the American Trucking Associations, ATA, in the United States, representing commercial motor carriers. So the strength of all three of these organizations is coming together both at the national level and at the state level to drive change in fighting insurance fraud, both in the area of towing and staged automobile accidents. The coalition is also looking at what is called a QI-TAM, or Whistleblower Act. This is a unique law, I believe, in the United States, but two of our states have these type of whistleblower laws in place right now. They allow an individual citizen who has knowledge of an entity committing insurance fraud to bring a lawsuit. They have to notify the state in which they reside first, and that state Department of Insurance or Attorney General has the right to intervene in their lawsuit. Or they can say, we're not going to intervene, but you can proceed. But these cases have been eminently successful in both the state of California and Illinois as an anti-fraud tool, because what they allow is that person who has knowledge about fraud and comes forward to retain financially a portion of any recovery that is made. And in the state of California alone, literally billions with a B of dollars have been recovered under that state's Insurance False Claims Act, something we're studying at the coalition to find the right way to introduce potentially in other states through a model act moving forward. The coalition also has the privilege of participating with regulation in the United States. And I've shared with you before, our regulatory system here is not at the US federal level. It's 51 different states and the District of Columbia that regulate how insurers investigate fraud and their duties and responsibilities under state regulation. So the coalition, on behalf of our diverse membership, worked very closely with the state of California to develop new regulations that they issued for the investigation of insurance fraud right around the time that we met last year in 2020. We're also working with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. That's the group that oversees those 51 organizations. They developed last year, with our assistance and input, a standardized anti-fraud plan for states that require reporting of insurance fraud in a specific plan, that hopefully they will adopt a single style of plan that can be filed once instead of 51 different styles of plans and content. And we're working with them again this year to come up with a central electronic portal where insurance companies can file that fraud plan once and be in compliance with multiple states all across the United States. And I've mentioned before, the unique thing about the coalition is that we are a consumer advocacy organization. So we continue to play an important role with our nation's insurance leaders as being the only organization that is a consumer advocacy organization in the world of anti-insurance fraud, or fighting insurance fraud, through the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Consumer Representative Program. And earlier this year, I had the privilege of presenting a program to our nation's insurance leaders about natural disaster fraud following wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, and other events in the United States, and how those insurance leaders can better protect their citizens from becoming victims of insurance fraud. So as I wrap up, we're excited here at the coalition. We're going to have our first in-person meeting since December of 2019, since shortly after we all were in Barcelona together. We'll gather here in Washington, D.C., December 6th and 7th, and we'll have our annual meeting of the coalition. We'll also be meeting again in June of 2022, just before I'll have the privilege of hopefully leaving for IASU Europe and their conference in Malmo. We'll be meeting just literally about a week to 10 days before in Orlando, Florida, for the coalition's mid-year meeting. So that's the update from the coalition. But let me simply leave you with this. Since we gathered in Barcelona in 2019, and even since we gathered virtually a year ago, we have traveled a very unclear path together as world anti-fraud leaders. We've been in uncharted territory dealing with a worldwide pandemic, the rise of globalization of fraud, new ways of committing cyber crimes. But our bonds are stronger than they've ever been. And the promise I make you from here in the United States with the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, we are your partner. I don't care whether you're a member of the coalition or not. All you need to do is reach out to us at any time, and we will endeavor to do our best to provide you with the necessary contacts, resources, and tools when you need assistance here in the United States. The reason for that, the need, my friends, for us to fight fraud and to do it together has never been greater. We learned that through this pandemic, and I hope that's the positive that comes from all of this, is that we continue to have those strong bonds working together. I leave you with this. Our vision as we come out of this pandemic is what will set our future. Now, around the world, one thing we're all familiar with is cars. And I love this saying, look at the rear view mirror on your car. It's very small. And the reason for that is what's behind us is small by comparison. And if we tried to drive looking in the rear view mirror, we'd all crash. But when we look out the windshield and we see that world that's out there ahead of us and where we're going, that's what excites me. And that's what excites us at the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud to be a part of this year's Global Summit. Because the future that we see as world leaders is simply up to us. Feel free to reach out at any time. Here is my contact information, my email, my phone. And even if you do start traveling again and your door brings you to Washington, or your travels bring you to Washington, D.C., our door is always open to any of you. So again, thank you for participating in this year's Global Summit. It's my privilege and honor for the coalition to be a part of the steering committee and to be able to provide you this update. And Dennis, with that, I turn it back over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Matthew. And I knew it would be a fantastic presentation just based on the history that we have with you. But I just want to reemphasize everything that you said is spot on. I think the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, for those around the world that have not looked into what you guys do, is amazing. With the small staff that you have and the amount of the impact that you've had on our industry in the United States, I don't think there's been a more impactful organization around the world, never mind just the United States. The advocacy, the information, and the outreach that you do is phenomenal. And I encourage everyone to go to www.insurancefraud.org and look at all the stuff that this organization is doing. So with that, thank you again, Matthew. I think we're looking forward to the globalization of the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud so everybody can experience what we've experienced here in the United States. So now next, we're going to go speak to Per and learn about IASO Europe. Thank you very much, and I hope you are enjoying the conference.